This actually reminds me of one of those scenes in a movie where you see they're picnicking in the rain and it's just so perfect that they all of a sudden burst out into song. The hills are alive with the sound.
I think she's lost her mind.
Tra-la-la-la.
Come back, Jeannie.
I bet you they'll appreciate me on Broadway.
Comment ne pas perdre la tête, serré par des bras audacieux, car l'on croit toujours aux doux mots d'amour quand ils sont dits avec les yeux.
Look at this.
What a nice surprise.
How did you sleep?
I slept so well.
Me too, and what a way to wake up.
What a way.
Quand ils sont dits avec les yeux.
Wow.
Comment?
Yeah, bravo.
But there's one song that Jeannie loves, and I don't know what the name of it
Oui,
is.
Edith Piaf.
Okay.
Je ne vais pas
That's the one.
travailler. My favorite song.
This is gonna make her day.
When we were originally told that we were going to be on a barge cruise, I didn't know what to expect at all. I always thought a barge was means of cargo transportation. So this is something completely different to what I expected, and yet it exceeded all my expectations because it's really been very special.
This canal, which is called the Midi Canal, starts in Toulouse and it ends in Montpellier at the coast. And it's basically an elevation difference of approximately 190 meters. So we've got to get from one elevation down to another elevation, and to do that we've got to pass through locks. So what happens is you go into this area, it locks it off, and then you sink to the lower level of another lock. Okay, now it goes very slowly, because if it goes too fast then we'll drop suddenly. So it's a very slow mechanism. It will reach a certain point and the water will just start rushing out, and literally within 4 or 5 minutes we'll drop to that level, which is 3 meters. Fascinating.
Can you see how we've sunk? I'm so impressed with this barge. It's really brilliant. I had no idea they would be this big.
Well, that's the maximum size that can cruise on the Canal du Midi, actually, because of the size of the locks. The locks are 30 meters long, hence this barge is 30 meters long.
So what we're experiencing is a luxury boat. However, it wasn't always like this.
This barge was originally built in 1937, long time before we were all born, and it was made for transportation of coal, sand, whatever. And at that time, she was 8 meters longer than she is today.
When it comes to boats, I would have always thought that the best way to travel would be by a speedboat or catamaran or a fancy yacht. However, it's such a pleasure to be on this barge and just take time going through and seeing the French countryside. But I've noticed there's lots of barges and houseboats along this canal. So what kind of lifestyle is it?
Well, it's a lifestyle that personally I love, you know. It's great because you live on the water, which is already a nice environment. And as what you said, the time doesn't count in a way. And it's a great lifestyle. And I've been living nearly 10 years in Paris on houseboats, and it was the best way to live in Paris anyway.
I went cycling today alongside the barge, and it was good fun. I got some exercise going. I felt like I needed it. I'm one of those people who usually play sport for one reason and one reason only, to win. However, here in the Canal du Midi, I've taken to living life at a leisurely pace by riding this bicycle aside the barge, and it's only about a 2-kilometer ride until we reach the next stop. So it's not exactly strenuous, but it certainly is enjoyable. And after this, I'm going to get back on the barge to a fantastic picnic prepared by a top chef. Yum.
This is the life. What I was reading is that the Canal Midi is about 240 kilometers long, but if you really want to be adventurous, you can actually travel all the way from St. Petersburg to the south of France to a port called Sète, which would probably take you about a year, but judging by what I've experienced, it's probably not a bad thing. Listen here, if you can't keep up with the pace, we're not waiting for you.
Race
Enjoy.
is on.
What?
The race is on.
So Jenny, how was the cycling this morning?
It was a fantastic cycle because the path goes along the side of the canal. And I now see why you've got mountain bikes, because it's very rocky. But it was a good cycle, I enjoyed it.
Well, the thing is that this way is called chemin de halage because before the boats and the barges had engines, there were wooden barges that were pulled by horses or even by men. Wow. So that's why along the whole canal and many rivers you have these ways. So that's a remain from the construction of the canal more than 3 centuries ago.
Imagine doing that for a job and the strength that a man must have had to have been able to pull on the barge.
You can try later on if you want, you know, to try to push the barge from the side. It moves quite easily.
I don't think I'm going to be doing it. But trust me, you don't need more than one person. Janez is more than strong enough to handle it on his own.
He will do it perfectly well. I saw he's very fit and strong, so he will be perfect for that.
Oh, yummy. Pete, this looks delicious. What exactly are we eating?
Well, this is a very Mediterranean tart. It's basically onions, lots of onions and garlic and peppers, tomatoes, all reduced down in a parmesan and herb crust.
Mediterranean food, and more specifically French cuisine, is very healthy.
Yeah, it is, yeah, very much so, yeah. I mean, this is all olive oil based. Then here we have a salad of endive with smoked bacon and mixed nuts, pine nuts, and then a dressing of nut oil and vinegar. Well, they seem to be thoroughly enjoying themselves, and they seem to really take on all the different flavours and trying to discern between the balances and all the rest of it. So it's very satisfying for me as a chef. Cheers, guys.
Cheers to a fantastic meal. Janez, should we go and crash a wedding?
I don't think we're invited. The one thing about the Languedoc region is it gets so hot during the day, so the best advice is have a siesta like we just did. And then when it's a bit cooler and the sun's gone down a bit, walk off the barge, go wander around the town, appreciate all the little shops and the restaurants and the whole vibe that there's here. And the whole idea about this area is everything happens at a leisurely pace.
I love it. So this is called Port du Sommeil, and directly translated is Port for the Sleepy. And the reason how it got its name is because obviously all the barges that were traveling through this canal were carrying cargo, and it was a really long journey for them. So they needed to have sleepovers and stop-offs. This was one of those places where they would have to stay overnight. So a lot of these buildings that you see around here were either hotels or dormitories.
It's incredible to think that all these towns were created specifically around this canal, and they're still buzzing with life today.
Absolutely. This looks like an old bookstore or library. We discovered the most magnificent bookstore. It was absolutely incredible, and just the smell of old books. I missed that smell. I haven't smelled it for so long. And you know when you smell a smell that brings back a nostalgic feeling? I got that the minute I walked into this library and bookshop. In the middle of the sleepy town, we've just discovered one of the oldest bookstores that I've ever seen. I cannot believe how many books there are, and they're all really old and so well preserved, even though some of them are dating back to 1762. Now, one of my favorite things about this bookstore is the smell. It just smells of old books.
It's so big, it actually looks like a barn that's been converted into a massive library, and it covers everything. It's got all the languages, every subject matter you can think about. And quite interesting, I found the perfect book to brush up on my skills.
Janez, it's still so hot.
You know, it's 8:30, and this is probably the perfect time to be walking through the streets. And the great thing about the south of France is it gets dark at only about 10 o'clock, so your days seem so much longer. The beauty about traveling on a barge is that you can literally stop at every town along the way or in the middle of nowhere. What will usually take you about 15 minutes by car will take you 2 or 3 hours on the barge, but it will really give you time to appreciate the beauty and tranquility of the French countryside. Now all I need to do is wake up Sleeping Beauty. Jeans, we gotta go. That girl.
This remarkable little city behind me is called Minerve, and in fact it has been selected as le plus bon village de France, meaning one of the most beautiful villages in France.
It's also one of many fortified villages in the area, and it has one access bridge which can be used only by the locals.
The history of Minerve is really dramatic. You have to come back to the 12th century when the Cathars were a strong religion in this area. And at that time, in 1209 exactly, the Pope and the King of France, Philippe Auguste, decided to send a crusade against the Cathars for religious and political reasons. After 5 weeks of besiege, the inhabitants had no more water, and then the village had to surrender. The condition for having the safe life was that the Cathars would have to deny their faith. Actually, 140 of them decided to keep their faith to Catharism, and the army burnt a huge fire here, just below this chapel, and 140 of these inhabitants threw themselves into the flames, because for them, anyway, it was an act of purity and faith to go straight into the fire.
It's a moment in history, this town. When you come here, you just get this feeling of total history. Olivier, from here you can actually see how well fortified the city actually is.
Yes, and that shows how impressive it was when an enemy army was arriving in the area, because they saw there was no way to take over the village and the city. And one key point in this whole history during the Middle Age is that most castles or cities were taken over by besiegers because of a lack of food or water. And here in Minerve, it is the water that eventually obliged the villagers to surrender, because there was one well, and this well was protected by a stone path. So the inhabitants, during the night, they could climb down, get some water, go up to the village and drink. But then the army of Simon de Montfort in 1210 installed this huge catapult that you can see here, which is a replica in wood, and they bombed all the time this well. So eventually the well was completely destroyed. The inhabitants had no more access to the water, and they had to surrender.
Olivier knows so much about this region. He's obviously been traveling up and down the Canal du Midi for years, so he's really an expert when it comes to the history of France.
This is also a really famous wine region, isn't it?
Yes, we are here in the Minervois, which is a wine of origin area inside the wines of the Languedoc, and it's one of the most famous actually.
This little village is usually bustling with people because there's art galleries and cafes and bookstores all over here. However, we're here early on a Sunday morning, so it almost feels like there's nobody else here and we're alone walking through these cobbled streets. But it's completely beautiful, really quaint, and all of these properties with the wooden shutters are still inhabited today by people.
And walking through Minerve feels like you're walking through a museum. Everything is so well preserved. All you hear is the sound of birds. It's so tranquil and peaceful. I'd love to own a home here.
I know, and apparently they do sell them off as holiday homes.
So it's our final stop, Jeans. We're about 2 or 3 hours of cruising, and then we go to Narbonne, which is a city of 50,000 people. So this is going to be completely different to those other villages we stopped in. And the interesting thing is that Narbonne used to be a coastal port on the Mediterranean, and it's now 15 kilometers inland.
I'm looking really forward to going to Narbonne because, in fact, it used to be a Roman city, and it was one of the places where Julius Caesar spent most of his time.
We are going to pass under the narrowest bridge of the whole canal, and you will see that the ceiling of the bridge is only a few centimeters above this wheel.
You've done this before?
Well, I could joke and say never, and I'm very afraid. But no, don't worry, I did it. And the
Okay.
barge is still in good shape.
You can almost see on the left-hand side, a chunk of the bridge of the arch has actually been taken away, which I hope wasn't done by you the last time, Olivier.
Oh, of course not.
I've got a newfound respect for you because I've been watching you steering this barge and I've been thinking it's probably the easiest thing in the world, but witnessing this right here, right now is a whole different ball game.
Voila, here we are. So I like...
Wow.
Voila.
Incredible. Truly incredible. Oh, there you go.
Voila. Up, you can get up again.
Olivier, that was 10 out of 10. Well
Ah,
done.
thank you very much, Janez. Now I can watch you.
I'm very proud to sail with you, Captain. I can see a very beautiful church through the trees there.
Yes, right, Janez. That's the church of Carcasonne. It's a fortified church whose construction started at the 13th century. So it's a beautiful church, and it's fortified because it could allow the villagers to come and get protection inside, you know, in case
really?
of the attack of gangsters or a small foreign army or whatever.
Wow, this is incredible. But it almost looks like half the cathedral has been cut off.
Well, actually, it's only half that has been built, because after they built the choir at the end of the 13th century, they wanted to complete the rest, you know, and build the main part of it. But there was a huge protection wall around the palace of the Archbishop, and during these times that were still very risky in terms of wars and so on, they didn't dare breaking down this huge protection wall for enlarging the cathedral. So it always stayed like that.
Wow, that is such a shame. Imagine how grand it would have been if it had been double the size. This part of the cathedral doesn't look like it's been as well preserved as the rest.
Well, this is another problem, because this retable that dates from the 13th century was later covered with a huge thickness of plaster. So nobody knew that it was there. And it is only in 1981, quite recently, that they discovered it incidentally. And it took them 10 years to try to remake it and find all the pieces everywhere to build a portion of it.
And these gold cathedral casings, it almost looks like they've kept bones in there.
Yes, they are the bones of the two saints to whom the cathedral is dedicated, Saint Just and Saint Sauveur.
It's a special feeling when you walk into a church that's got so much history, and it actually gives you a moment to think about how important religion was in those days. I think it's something that's lost to us as a human race these days. We don't realize that how important the state considered its religion and how much money they spent and how much effort it took. Okay, so we're at the top of the stairwell. We're about to enter the treasury. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can actually hear my voice echoing as it bounces off the walls. There's also a domed roof, so all the sounds bounce towards each other. We're going to do a little test. I'm going to pretend to be the priest. You go stand in the back corner and pretend to be the leper. I'm going to do a little confession. Can you hear me? That's incredible because my voice is basically bouncing off the walls, off the round roof, off the floor and directly towards you. And this was the safest way for a leper to basically come and confess his sins without the priest getting sick. Olivier, this building is so opulent. Where are we?
We are in the private flats of the archbishops of Narbonne, and this huge flat here that is today a museum of art dates from the 17th century. Obviously this room has been revamped, of course.
And what was this room used for?
That was the lounge in the flats of the archbishop.
And the art collections, where do they come from?
Most of these paintings come from France. They are from the 17th and 18th century, and there are also a lot of paintings from the Flemish and from the Italian schools.
I'm so intrigued by the paintings in this room. Their detail is immaculate, and they're actually painted to perfection that on some of the pictures you're waiting for the person to move because they look so real. A lot of them depict a story of the time that they were created.
What I love about art is it's such an important means of documenting history. These paintings all tell a real story, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. And this one is really marvelous. It represents Saint Andrew, the first of the apostles, who was a fisherman, and this is why the fish has been represented here. And the painter is Giuseppe di Ribera, who is a famous painter from the Baroque art. He was born in Spain and died in Napoli in 1656.
This is the only permanent collection of North African art in France, and it's very symbolic to France as these were all colonial empires.
Oh, wow.
Okay, guys.
You've done it again. Thank you so much for feeding me like a queen for the past couple of years.
Thank you. Thanks for fattening us up, Pete.
Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.
First course is a courgette and parmesan gâteau, served with a brunoise of vegetables and a piquant red pepper sauce. The gâteau is a delicate flavour, just lifted a bit with the piquant red pepper sauce. Course number 2 is a filet mignon of pork, locally reared, and that's served with a dauphinoise potatoes, a celeriac and carrot puree, and a galette of walnuts and lemon.
Every country we go to, we end up saying, oh, this is my favorite country, I love it so much. Although, it's almost true. Every single country offers something tasty and something completely different that you end up falling in love with, a different aspect of that place.
You don't think that maybe we have an obsession with food?
That's a guarantee. Bonsoir.
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 The dinner.
The dinner was absolutely fantastic, and we must thank you, because just being on this barge and experiencing the south of France, seeing it from this viewpoint, has been magnificent.
And you know, Olivier, we travel all over the world and we meet so many people and see so many places, but experiencing this with you has been so special, and I think it's a moment Jeannie and I will treasure forever. So thank you.
Well, I'm very happy about that, so let's drink about it. Yes. Cheers, Jeannie. Cheers, Janez.
Cheers.
Oh, and the dessert.
Ah, voilà.
Wow. And the party's coming to join us.
There's such a festive atmosphere here in the south of France during
yes.
summer.
Yeah, that's the south of France. That's the magic of the south of France and the Canal du Midi especially. You know, it is a world in itself, in fact.
Oh, I don't know which one to choose. They all look so good.
Chocolate for you, Jeannie. Strawberries for you because you're full of life.
Thank you.
It's just big.
Bon appetit.
Thank you.
Now this is what makes the south of France. Just the ambiance and the vibe of the people. The joie de vivre.
Don't lie, it's the Frenchmen, Jeannie.
I love Frenchmen. Janez, final destination, Ile de Maurice. What I've decided is to put myself to the test and create the ultimate final meal for my travel companion.
Stop. Come on.